8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Okay.
Okay, everybody, welcome to Ending the Stigma, a Path to Recovery. I am Fred Carroll, and you are Scott H. Silverman. How are you, Scott?
I'm well, Fred. I'm well, thanks.
Yeah, you were running a little late today. You cut it close.
No, I actually was on for a little while that I didn't see, and I was closing out Facebook, and I ended up shutting down StreamYard.
Oh, okay. You got an excuse.
Yeah.
But I was about to say it was going to be one of them things where I had to go on by myself, and it was going to be like that Wayne's World part where Garth is sitting there by himself after they went live, and he's not used to it, and I'm going to have to do the scanners where they do this. Ooh, doo, doo, doo. But we're going to show a video real quick that you did live on TV because I think it's important for people to see. And, you know, anybody out there, just so you know, if for some reason the video is not playing the sound, please let me know in the comments and I'll figure it out and shut it down. But I think this is an interesting thing, so we're going to try it. Let's try this just for fun. Let's try it. So here we go.
I'm ready. I can't hear him. Nothing at my end, Fred. Turn up that volume. Can you hear it at your end?
I hear it, yeah.
I don't. I hear you, but I don't hear it. If I can't hear it, can others hear it, you think?
I don't know.
Okay.
But they could hear us.
Yep. You want to talk about what I'm saying? We could do that. This was a great interview. I really appreciated what they did and the coverage. This was Fox 2 in Detroit in the morning. Talking about the opioid epidemic. How come I can't hear it, Fred?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. You want me to narrate, or do you think others are hearing it?
Nobody's complaining.
Is anybody watching?
We'll find out. Yeah, we got people watching.
Okay. So has anybody let you know in the chat room they can't hear it?
Nobody has yet.
Huh.
So I stopped sharing it, Scott, because I'm not sure if, you know, I stopped sharing it because nobody's telling us they can or cannot hear it, but I'm unsure since you can't hear it, but I could hear it. So I don't know if it's set up correctly to be shared. I shared it like every other time, but people get the gist of it, and we could, that's available. The video is available on fox2detroit.com. They could go to, and they could find that video. I just thought it was a very good video, but let's discuss since you did this about 2 weeks ago, you sent the book to every governor in the United States.
Correct.
So if I paid attention in geography class, that's 72 governors, right? Is it 72 states that we have? See, I didn't pay attention, and it's close.
Some people say there's 52. I think I sent, I took the list off the internet and sent one to every governor with a pretty strong letter of introduction and appeal to talk about the opioid crisis and how we as a community, we need to do the work. The government's not going to do it. And I firmly believe that we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to talk to our kids. We're going to have to get the word out. And the idea of the book, I said a book and a letter. So the idea would be is hopefully somebody will pick up the book in their offices and make a phone call and figure out how we can combat this horrendous situation that continues to grow. I think I shared with you last time we spoke a week ago that overdoses are up over 40% in San Diego alone. And what's fascinating, I just learned, you're familiar, we've talked about Narcan before. It's made with that medication. It's called naloxone. Narcan is a nasal spray that people can give somebody who's experiencing an overdose. So according to my source, the overdoses last year, according to CDC, was 90,000, up from 72 the year before. But here's what my source told me, that the overdoses are north of 500,000 because Narcan, a miracle drug, reversed a lot of overdoses. So in reality, if we didn't have this miracle drug, we probably would have lost more people last year to opioid overdoses than we did to COVID. So when you factor that piece of information in, and Narcan is now getting into almost every school, and most law enforcement arms carry it. But think about that for a second. If we didn't have something like that, we would have lost 500,000 people last year. And the overdoses continue to grow. I just heard Michigan's is up, Florida is up, and I heard Texas is up, Arizona as well. And these are just pieces I'm hearing from people and what I'm reading. So we have, and what's even more scary is the experts say the prescription opioid, technically is still in medicine cabinets. We know that. So what people are overdosing with is counterfeit medication, meaning they're getting something that's cut with fentanyl, that fentanyl is in, and fentanyl is what's causing people to die. It's very potent, 100 times stronger than morphine, 50 times stronger than heroin. And, it looks like a Xanax, and some people may be putting it in a vitamin C tab. They're getting capsules off of Amazon. They're making it at home, and they're putting it in these capsules with no quality assurance. And people can make fentanyl at home. You can get it on the dark web. You can have it shipped to your home, and you can manufacture it. We're seeing it out here in marijuana. We're seeing it in cocaine. We're seeing it in heroin, and obviously all by itself. So that being said, people that don't know what they're taking, there's a high percentage of chance they may be getting something that is mixed with fentanyl. So the thinking is this isn't really an overdose. This is somebody who's actually poisoning other people. And you think about that for a second. And part of what I talked about in the interview is, imagine this, Fred, you get on a plane, the plane is full, roughly 240 people, and that plane crashes and everybody dies. And right now in this country, every single day, 240 people are dying behind the overdose of fentanyl mostly and opioids. So if a plane crashed every day, there'd be huge outrage. That everybody would tell the FAA to not let an airplane go up in the air, figure out what's going on and stop it. And part of the idea of the book the opioid epidemic was to get the word out with tools. And in the book, there are tools for families, for parents, what to do, how to talk to your child, and the things that to look out for. And that's why the book was written. So I'm hopeful that, the governors will pick up the letter in the book and make some phone calls and figure out how we can set up some sort of a national, not only an education opportunity, but a prevention plan, a lot more aggressive than whatever we have now, and then informing people so we can slow this thing down and find a way to stop it, because there is no vaccine for opioids. If someone takes and ingests too much of it, they're going to expire. And that's about as plain as I can put it.
Right. And so there's a lot of steps we could go in this. One is so many directions. This stuff, what's it called again? The stuff that's killing fentanyl. So eliminating fentanyl doesn't make sense because it is needed for legitimate drugs. Correct? Because it is a legitimate painkiller.
Right. Fentanyl was actually designed, from what I understand, manufactured and created for people who had extreme pain around cancer. And when it was approved, one of the statements was, no one will ever, this never hit the street like Oxycontin did, because it is generally put into the body intravenously while someone's in the hospital, and it's administered by medical professionals. The problem now is the recipe and the narcotic itself is now available on the web and on the dark web, and the manufacturers of the key products, if you order it, they'll send it to anybody. And the main delivery system is the USPS, and they can't look at every single box, and it just takes a small amount to make a lot of pills. So it's a real dilemma right now. And it's like, again, it's more like a poison. I was talking to somebody yesterday. Imagine, your grocery store, all of a sudden 3 or 4 or 5 people complained they got sick from some bad chicken. They'd pull all the chicken out of the refrigerated section, the freezer section, and make sure nobody bought chicken until there was a green light to go eat chicken again. Well, we have to take the same approach with fentanyl, and we have to educate, and we have to help prevent. And by doing that, by informing young people, because they're the ones who are the big target right now for this particular unfortunate hazardous material.
Right, they are. But so here's some counter conversation pieces. So one with my daughter, talking with my daughter about this, we were talking about how when famous people come out and talk about their issues now, unlike when we were growing up, it was the opposite for us. We tended to do drugs because our rock stars were doing drugs. They promoted that. So now if those same rock stars come back and tell us don't do drugs, we tend to dismiss that. And so the age gaps are at opposite ends right now. My daughter is paying attention to the people saying, I have depression, I have anxiety, I've had this, I've had a drinking problem. While I'm still paying attention to Ozzy Osbourne telling me he's having a blast, go out and get drunk, go out and do this. And then I just don't know where the solution to ending any of this is on both ends, because it's so counterbalanced.
Well, I would say that the biggest caveat in what you just shared is this. Fentanyl is a narcotic that generally kills almost anybody who takes it. Alcohol, you don't hear many times of people overdosing. So it is a different kind of drug. It's a narcotic that kills, and really it's a poison.
It's not a call into the show.
Your neighbor turned down the volume?
No, it was one of those scam current. See, I can't tell when the number comes across anymore. Another problem in America we need to end is these scam phone calls. This is another issue, but we won't talk about that because it's not stigmatized.
We have a saying in the program that, if you have an issue, grab a tissue.
Right. So like what you're saying, yeah, it all makes sense, but I see so much difference between the age gap of me and you and the age gap of our children, for instance. Right. Who we're listening to and where we're getting our information from. because honestly, you and I have much more life experience and different experiences, but they're still life experiences. But they have information that me and you were never privy to. We had you did what your friends told you to do, basically. It was all
Right.
about who you were hanging out with. Now it's okay and it's cool to say no. It's cool to say you're depressed. It's cool to say, for me and you, it was quite the opposite. And it's hard to overcome that.
Right.
But you also mentioned age things. And I read a thing today from, I think I still have it up here on the web, on the interweb. And it was from medicalexpress.com, which is the opioid overdoses spiked during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's the data. And some of the data, it's places like Pennsylvania got hit the hardest. Okay. Middle America type got hammered. And this is where supposedly where these drugs actually started. The meths and stuff all were middle America and spread out to the East Coasts and the West Coast. But and the only reason I know that is I dated a girl who was from Iowa, and she had mentioned that her father had to start by law locking up his chemicals for farming because kids were breaking in and stealing the chemicals and making meth with the chemicals that farmers use. And that's
Right.
where it all started. And there's nothing to do but get high. So these kids are finding ways to get high, and that's why they're huffing and they're doing the pills, like you say, the Skittles. But they also mentioned that the people that are dying from overdoses tend to be between 40 and 59. There's more deaths between those ages than the other ages. And I don't know if that's just because we don't have the bounce back. At 59, you don't have the same fortitude to bounce back and fight things like a 20-year-old might be able to. But it's quite alarming to read that. And it looks like it all came down to, they mentioned fentanyl, the shift in the drugs involved from opioids to illegally manufactured drugs such as fentanyl has resulted in the expansion of the epidemic in urban areas and among other racial and ethnic groups. Because for the first time since 2013, the white non-Hispanic Americans' life expectancy declined for the first time since 2013. So white America was affected by it.
Right. And I think it's also important to point out, because I always get this from somebody when they hear the message, there are some people, many people who legitimately need some of these drugs to deal with whatever's going on with them. It's medically, prescribed, it's supervised, it's monitored. And, the goal would be to taper off and dose down and or take other medication. We call that medication-assisted treatment in the treatment world, where somebody was actually in treatment, taking a medication prescribed by an expert, a doctor, whether it's a psychiatrist whose specialty is addiction or a medical doc who understands, some of these very strong drugs, and they need to have them. So I don't say to people, we need to, take them all to a pile and burn them. What I say is just make a good, solid, informed decisions when you're sitting at these parties. You mentioned the demographic, but the studies around those numbers are probably, there may be a flash study that was done last year, but right now what's happening is a younger group of kids are picking up this stuff and they're mixing it with other things or someone else's, and then they're sharing it. And fentanyl is not like cocaine. It's not like methamphetamine. It's not even like marijuana. Fentanyl is a very, very toxic poison. So if there's even the tiniest bit it mixed with any of those mechanisms we just mentioned, vaping to marijuana to just taking a capsule full of Xanax that's mixed with fentanyl, if fentanyl is in it, there is a probability that the person that's taking it is going to potentially overdose, no matter what their age is. And, somebody who's 40 or 50, you'd think they'd know a little bit better But on the other hand, if you're in pain or you're suffering or you're going through withdrawal or you're detoxing and you can't get to somebody, or you're just in an emotional level of distress or depression or anxiety and you want to fix it quick, you take a pill. And the problem with that is these counterfeit medication pills are cut or whacked, if you will, with fentanyl. And that's what scares me, because I think people, if they want to party. I mean, I did, for God's sakes. But, back in our day, we would pick things up, and the purity of what's coming out today. Methamphetamine, for example, is now almost 97% pure. In my day, it was 9-10%. So that's another issue. The same thing with, marijuana. It's 95% plus THC. So when you're smoking something today or taking something today, the level of, potential for an outcome that's negative is really, really, really high, because it's very strong. And if you're a kid who's on Adderall, for example, or you're taking some other anti-anxiety medication and you introduce a street drug into the body, and that's exactly what happened to Whitney Houston. She was taking prescribed medication and she was also partying. I think, we've talked about this before, but I'll bring it up again. It was Dr. Drew, one of the, famous experts who talks about this, who said, the music industry, the entertainment industry, the group you've just described, my generation, we partied all the time, and heroin was a very common drug, but you mix that with prescription medication and then somebody puts in some fentanyl, that is just a combination of a narcotic that kills people. Not sometimes, most of the time. So to even risk the fact that there might be there. I told a story last week, but I'll say it again for those listening today. We had a homeless guy that made the news that is a methamphetamine addict. And he said he's testing his methamphetamine to make sure that there isn't fentanyl in it. So when they're getting high off their drug of choice, they're not going to wind up in the morgue. That is the kind of information that we really need to get into people's hands. And the whole idea, when you think about the stigma about, self-medicating, people don't usually tell somebody, but there is a group of people now that are taking opioids on a regular basis, and they'll actually carry Narcan on them. And they'll tell their buddy, if something happens to me, be sure and put this nasal spray up my nose. And you talk to some of the emergency doctors, and I sit on a committee with doctors, the emergency department, they're talking about seeing some people 3 and 4 times a week who come in around an overdose from opioids. And they're lucky that, the EMTs or first responders, because they all carry it on their rigs now, that they had that. We had 8 people overdose in our county jail recently, 8 people, but they were all saved because somebody, was mindful enough and they had Narcan in the facility and saved all their lives.
But I have to believe that when you're seeing the same as an EMT or something, and you're saving the person for the 3rd time this month or the 4th time, you get desensitized to that person. You start caring less about, you stop looking at them as a person, because that's human nature. And I don't blame them, because there is a point where that person is jeopardizing other people's lives, because now we're taking care of you for the 4th time while somebody's having a heart attack across town, natural, that we can't get to on time because we're saving you again. And
And by the way, that count of 3 or 4 is a week. Is a week. That's one of the records that's not actually uncommon, according to what I'm hearing from emergency doctors. They see the same people, and you're absolutely right. Law enforcement gets called, the ambulance gets called, the fire department gets called. That's a lot of people that are there to save somebody who, once they get revived from their overdose, or they reverse the overdose with this miracle drug, Narcan or naloxone, they're back out it again, because hospitals, their role is not to say to something, they may say it, but once an individual leaves and stabilized, there's no way to follow up with them. So we're in this perfect storm where, if we're not careful, you and I are going to be sitting here a year from now talking about how, 500,000 people actually died from overdosing. And if you look at the percentage in our community, 400%, You take that, extrapolate it over the next 12 months, it's going to be significant. The numbers are really, really going to grow, and they're not going to get any better. And right now, our district attorney in our community is really looking to prosecute people who actually sell these drugs, if you will, to people who overdose and die, and charging them with, potentially first degree or second degree or involuntary manslaughter. And then the 20-year-old who may have given it to their cohort, their friend, they may go to jail or prison for the rest of their life. And the person who manufactured it, the 100,000 pills, they're not getting caught because they're so far down the food chain. They're insulated from their distributors. So it's really a weird situation right now.
Yeah, it is. And you mentioned the perfect storm of things. And, I look at it from so many different points of view because I'm trying to find what's the happy middle, where's the solution. I realize you can't change everything. It's kind of like the gun control type thing. Criminals are still going to get gun, all that stuff. And drug addicts and alcoholics and stuff are always going to get their fix some way or another. So if you legalize drugs, means the positive to that would be the government would then have people in place monitoring the distribution and the makeup of these drugs, which takes the fentanyl out of the drug. Okay, theoretically. But it's still, if you're the person getting that drug legally, now it's legal and it's going to Scott H. Silverman, there's nothing stopping you from putting fentanyl in that drug, then selling it on the street. So how do you solve that? You just can't solve all these problems.
No. And, it's interesting. It was just in the paper here the other day. Our governor just earmarked $100 million to help process the licensing, to help marijuana growers and retailers get the proper certification. I mean, you never hear about a state that puts $100 million out to give money for treatment and give money to people who suffer from, mental illness and or addiction or from, substance use disorders. And it'd be nice to hear that as well, because clearly that kind of infusion of capital would at least offer people the opportunity that if they decide Tuesday morning after an overdose Monday night, they want to go into treatment, if they're able to get there and we're able to kind of give them the tools that they need. That's the informed part of it. It's an extreme environment, but it could be a motivated individual as well. But we're not doing it right now. We're counting the death rate. We're talking about what more we can do. And to me, it's kind of simple, educate, prevent, and inform. That's what I think we need to do so much more of. And we need to make it as much a daily conversation as we do about what's going on with perceived voter fraud, or, the things that the things that we see on the news that, the 24-hour news channels will put out 24 hours a day. If they were taking 10% of that time and talking about, being informed, making informed decisions, and then rolling across the screen or the banner in the bottom, who to call, how to call, and why it's important to call. I mean, I was just checked by somebody who said, you tell somebody they need to ask for help. If somebody doesn't know how to ask for help, how do you teach them how to do that? And we do have, you and I talk about the crisis hotlines. You put it up almost every show. But most people, when they're in pain, they're not going to reach out for help. That's where the family can really come in. The parents can do that intervention. And in the book, it talks about a variety. There's 3 chapters that are dedicated to talking to parents about how to talk to their kids and how to be present and how to be mindful and how to listen, because that's important. That's part of the education, prevention, inform piece of it. So, because nobody, if you said to me, hey, Scott, you got to stop doing that, I'd say, thank you very much, Fred. And let's move on. I wouldn't hear you. And maybe over time I would. The problem with fentanyl is you don't get to hear it 1,000 times because
right.
it takes lives.
So, I mean, it boggles me sometimes, all these things. But so with the education process, are you saying maybe there should be a subject matter created around it where it's literally daily? These kids go through some kind of a drug culture or abuse, or I mean, is it a life? What would it be, like a life issue class, a life, support system?
Do you watch TV, Fred? I know a lot of kids don't watch TV, and I use the term loosely with kids. But if you look at television today, what do you see? You see commercials for Medicare. I mean, and here in our community, we how to replace your windows, how to get solar on your roof. We hear about obviously now coming out of COVID and the ending of being in quarantine. We need to talk about ending the stigma. We need to talk about making informed decisions when you're in environments where you don't know what you're taking in. And, if you were at a party and somebody ate some of the fish that was prepared and they got sick, the rest of the group wouldn't sit there and finish the fish if that's where they thought the problem came from. They would pause, they would find something else in that buffet and they would eat it. Like I said earlier, the idea of, when we have bad chickens or a bad batch of eggs or, Trader Joe's, there was a bad batch of chips. I mean, Trader Joe's went online, emailed everybody on their, email list and told them, if you bought these chips from this and this time, please bring them in. We'll give you credit. Buy something else. If we don't make this part of a daily discussion, and I'm not suggesting we target a certain demographic and say, you must spend time. We just need to make it as easy through social media, through different platforms, through YouTube, and take some of these people you spoke of, some of these, high profile musicians and movie stars and sports figures who have suffered from this, and make sure that they're doing the PSAs, the public service announcements. And, whenever you turn on a TV and a 30-minute segment of anything runs, one of those spots talks about this. So it's just a matter of, because, repetition's the mother of education. But if we continue to just look at the stigma and we ignore the fact that it is a problem and someone else is taking care of it, it continues to grow and fester. And I think that's what's going on. And now we've got this tsunami, and nothing stops a tsunami like a volcano. Nothing stops it. And, there is no vaccine for addiction. There is no vaccine for an overdose. Right now, the only thing that we have is naloxone that reverses it. You can't slap somebody around, throw them in the pool and wake them up. If it's in their system and you can't stop it or reverse it, they're going to die. And right. when you think about the plane crash model every day, 240 people, think about the families and the siblings and the spouses and the grandparents who are also impacted by that one person's death. And this is preventable. And there's all forms of treatment out there today, and people you can call, and facilities that will work with you, and crisis hotlines that'll talk with you. And every city has got some 211 information hotline you can make a phone call to if you're not sure. Meaning, if you're putting something in your hand and you're thinking about putting it in your body, and there is any chance, whatever it might be, even half of 1%, that it might be laced with something that's poisonous, absolutely think twice before you put it in your body.
Right.
I mean, that sounds pretty simple and straightforward, but clearly the message isn't getting to the consumer. And, the poison people, the manufacturers, they don't care, because if their product gets in someone's body and somebody overdoses and dies, that hits the news for a minute and it sells more drugs.
Well, there is power in, like what you said, with the sports stars and stuff. Are you familiar with this Cristiano Ronaldo thing that happened the other day with the Coca-Cola?
No.
So he's you know who he is? He's one of the most famous soccer stars in the world. So okay. Soccer's huge across the world, of course. It's a world sport versus baseball and football. He sat down at the podium and they had 2 bottles of Coca-Cola there because Coca-Cola is a sponsor. Well, he picked them up and removed them, held his water bottle up, and he said, drink water, not this. Coca-Cola lost $4 billion yesterday. $4 billion off of that alone. That's insane.
Well, there you go. That's a powerful influencer. Imagine if that same statement took place with, even if you had to go to the extreme and say, look, here's a bag of marijuana and a bong, and here's a teaspoon of fentanyl. If you have to make a choice, I mean, you don't play around with fentanyl. You don't play around with narcotics like that, because they can and will kill you. And look, when you think about Coca-Cola, I mean, what is it? Water and sugar. So it's, the sugar that's in there. That's one of the big things that people are concerned about. But, we're a society of sugar consumption. And, when I get asked the question, what is it with America? I mean, why are we so pill oriented? Why do we want to anesthetize ourselves so much? Because it seems like per capita, we've got the records of anywhere in the globe. Is it disposable income? Is it access? Look, if I was a manufacturer of something illicit, I would pick America to distribute to. Why not? The consumer here is going to pick it up.
And there's money. There's money here. There's enough money. There's enough ways for them to make money. Yeah. It's quite sad that there really is no clear-cut path to ending the stigma, technically. I guess if I had to write down on a piece of paper where to begin, like a 10-step program almost to solving this drug abuse issues, I think ending the stigma would be the first step. So we humanize everyone. Stop dehumanizing the drug addict. Don't make him the problem. Let's make the drug the problem instead of the person taking the drug and go from there. So maybe if we start humanizing people, and I think that's important to do, don't look at a homeless man. A lot of those people out there that are homeless weren't homeless last year. Some of them 10 years ago were CEOs of companies. People fall on bad times, and it could happen quick. And I think it could happen quicker when you have a lot of money. When you're living the high life, it's a lot easier to end up on the street eventually because you could lose it all quick. I think it's important that even since I've done this show, and I'm not always, I'm no perfectionist and I'm not perfect. I make so many mistakes and judging people, stigmatizing people and stuff. But ever since I started doing the show, I'm more awake and more, paying attention to my fellow man, my neighbor again and all that. Because I do miss those times. I miss knowing my neighbor 10 houses away. Because I grew up in a neighborhood where the guy 10 houses away could yell at me. He could tell me, stop throwing stones or stop riding my bike in the street. And I listened. Now the parents sue that neighbor for yelling at their kid. Right. It just goes back to everything. So I miss that time, but I'm not going to live in the past. I understand we move forward. There are ways to change. And one of the changes I made in my life is trying not to stigmatize people just because they're quote unquote beneath me on a ladder, on a rung, or above me, or white, black, yellow, green, red, Jewish, any religion, Mormon. I'm trying not to label them anymore just because of that. Label them from other things maybe if there's a past and a history, because that's the hardest thing is I'm saying all this, but you still have to be wary and protect yourself. A criminal's a criminal. If the guy's got a past criminal history, you don't have to treat him poorly, but you do have to keep your eyes open. You have to be aware that people don't always change. And that's the hardest thing to teach my child is treat everybody equal, except people that don't deserve to be equal. People that have already done you wrong. So it's a hard lesson. I think for me, it is. It's a hard lesson to teach because I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth a lot. But I'm not wrong.
And when you talk about that, the word stigma, I mean, I was on a call the other day with 4,000 other people on a webinar, and the topic was reducing stigma. And there are people who believe, and I think the science has started to show it. If we can end the stigma, reduce the stigma, then we can penetrate somebody's soul and mind or heart. And by being mindful of what it is you've just described, maybe not the way you described it, but being mindful of others, we can teach not only through example, but when the question comes up, what do I tell my child? If you're informed, you can share information with that parent, and if your children are in school and the schools have all the support that they need to work on the prevention education side, then the conversation happens during the day at school with young people, and it happens at night with families, and it happens with their contemporaries. Because I don't know anybody, I've never met anybody who said to me, you know, I lost a friend to an overdose or to a drug addiction. And you know what? It was a happy day. It's not a happy day. And it's not one of those kind of things that really takes a lot. And sometimes just listening to somebody when something's going on with them gives you a chance to maybe help them navigate next steps. And that's what I do with everything I do throughout the day, the week, the month, and the year, is try to help inform, because that's the simplest way to do it. But we need to get the information out there in a much more robust way.
Yeah, it's a challenge. There's a lot of challenges going on. I don't know if you would, but I wouldn't trade places with my daughter to live in her era versus mine for some reason. I don't know. There's a lot of pressure on these kids, and a lot of they're very adept to instant information. And their attention span is 90% less than ours. You know, they're not going to sit through a 3-hour epic movie like me and you would. We sat through Gandhi's and stuff. Try sitting your kid down to watch Gandhi, the movie. I went with my school and watched it. It's a boring movie, but
yeah, but you know what kids do today that's unique is, and because there's a medium there, the internet, you know, the social media, the Instagrams, Facebooks, the Twitters of the world. There are gaming online is just huge. And so imagine if we could get information coming into those portals. Imagine if everybody on Twitch, part of what they could do is apply for resources to fund their shows with the understanding that they would share with their audience the kind of things we're talking about. And if it came from that perspective, and the person doing the information sharing was a high profile thought leader. You know, Robert Downey Jr., we talk about him periodically. He used to say that whenever he did cocaine, he broke out in handcuffs. Imagine if somebody like that were making these commercials or infomercials or information sharing opportunities. And then you could, you know, even personalize these, you know, what is that, Cameo or something, where you can actually get these people to make these personal messages and get them out to people in a way that we haven't thought of. And it doesn't really matter where you live, big city, metropolitan, suburban, farm areas, you know, Indian and indigenous people living on reservations, people living on the street. Because right now, the homeless are a huge target for the fentanyl distributors because it's cheap, you need a small amount, and it's easy to move around. So, and they're starting to expire now at a much higher rate. And I just had this heated conversation with somebody that talked about, you know, there's a housing first model that the nation's been working on, you know, give everybody a place to live and they'll be fine. Not somebody who suffers from mental illness. They don't do well alone. And evidently the model, I want to say Denver, but I'm not positive if it was, you know, Denver or not, but in certain states, they've studied this now, and people who living alone who have problems, they have a much higher rate of morbidity now, of death, either through suicide or overdose or alcohol poisoning, because they're living alone. And it's a lonely place to be, especially when you're suffering. Think about it.
You actually just, when you said what you said, I had this idea pop into my mind that I think may work, and I don't think it's out there. You're basically talking about Cameo interventions. That's what you're talking about, and I don't think they exist. It's a Cameo intervention where we have, say, some guy that's really going down a bad path, and he's in the middle of an intervention, and he gets to see his favorite actor or musician or somebody on camera or live on a phone call saying, personalizing it and really saying, listen, Robert, we need you. You know, could that change somebody's life? I think it can. I really think people are affected because we fall in love with these people that are complete strangers. We know nothing about them. We fall in love with their characters on screen or their music that touches us. They become closer to us than our best friend that's living next door sometimes. They touch us, you know.
Imagine you're a family and you're struggling with a child. Imagine if you could, you know, go and get one of those cameos and you know that your child loves this XYZ tennis player or golfer. And, you could call them or, go online and get them to personalize a message to your son or daughter. How powerful that might be. This thought came up, a couple of weeks ago for me about doing something like that, because, most of them do it, especially last year they did it because a lot of them weren't generating revenue. I mean, I'm not talking about the filthy rich who have made their tens of hundreds of millions in the industries, but people who, were working people making a lot of money and then stopped making money. Imagine if you could get them to be part of that messaging. And I think that's the kind of thing that on a higher level, we could really get those national influencers involved. And then you can maybe even get personalized messages, even zooming into schools, guys like Tony Hawk, a big famous skateboarder here in our community. And I know we've got retired football players and baseball players that are in recovery, and there's movie stars and musicians and people who have done really well. And one of the experts who spoke on this webinar the other day basically said, he goes, if I'm talking to a child at my age, and I think he was probably in his 50s, he goes, what I'm saying is not going to resonate with the child. But if somebody who's a contemporary of that child makes the same message, it's going to resonate. And they'll be the ones, just what you said. I had no idea, but I'm going to look it up. But imagine having that kind of influence where you can actually impact a marketplace where one product lost that kind of money in a matter of days, overnight.
Right. Well, I do think it's beneficial. I know it's not something, for instance, somebody's drug issues isn't my problem. Okay. That's how a lot of America thinks.
Right.
But I do see a value in making it my problem. There's a value in it because, like you said, for every drug addict, 15 people daily, are affected by that person one way or another?
No, 15% of our population suffers from some addiction issue that will evolve or erupt over the next 12 months. And each one of them will impact 7 people negatively. So when you think about it's 85% of our population that potentially could be impacted or affected or infected, if you will, by somebody who's under the influence or is impaired from being under the influence when they move about their day.
Because there is the value I see in it. Now, I may never know the value. It would be a very unselfish thing for humans to start doing, is caring about that guy again, because technically, as he becomes more of an addict and turns to crime now to pay for his addiction, you might be the house he robs. You might be the woman who he mugs in the parking lot. You might be stuck in the grocery store when he comes in to rob it. And you don't know if you saved him or not. You don't know if it was him, but I think that's the value. We got to start thinking that way, that be proactive for 10 years, look further into the future, make yourself safe in 10 years. If you could make your community, it's got to be individualized.
Right.
We both agree, screw the government. We don't need the government involved in this. We need you and me and the government. You're in San Diego. I'm in a small town, Brantford, Connecticut, who I'm sure has just as many problems per capita. It all matches up the same. I'm outside major cities. And if I could do what I can in my community and make Brantford a safer place, you're doing what you could do to make San Diego a safer place. It's going to benefit you, whether it's in property value, safety for your children, less drugs on the street for your children, better school system. There are ways out there, but we need to get people sharing our podcast, which is available on Apple and Spotify. You can go to venomstudios.com, which is venomstudios.com. That's with a Z. You could find Scott on Facebook. You could find me on Facebook. We're available to everyone out there. Scott gives out his phone number. You want to give it out, Scott?
Sure. 619-993-2738. So to your point, Fred, if each one helps one, think about that. Imagine, 6 months, a year from now, the audience that we're talking to, just you and I, rounds up to 500,000 people a week. Imagine if each one of them, talk to 3 or 4 or 5 people that week, and then you start to extrapolate that data. And over a 3 or 4 year period, everyone's going to get the message from someone else who heard it and it became informed. And when you think about how easy it is to just, start that conversation. Not easy to start the conversation, but if you're willing to have it and be part of the solution. Imagine if we started giving, I don't think giving money is the best way to go. A couple of states did it with the, getting inoculated, getting your vaccine, and they were paying out, $1 million lotteries. Imagine if somebody got and they partnered with Apple and somebody got the new iPad Pro. You help save a life, you get a reward. You help educate somebody and they come in and testify, and then you put your name in for a lottery. Imagine if we were giving away billions of dollars every month across this country to somebody who helps somebody else. I hate to put it on a monetary level, but if that creates the incentive to just push this information out, imagine the money that would be saved. Just the emergency department's costs to deal with this kind of individual that we've been discussing, and let alone the homeless, is billions, if not tens of billions every year, if not more. And there are people who say, and there's studies that have been done, because of the person who's self-medicating, the medical costs are well over and close to $1 trillion a year. For those who don't have insurance or can't pay for it, or they just don't have something in their policy that covers, addiction, substance use disorders, or mental health issues. They cover primary care. So imagine that. I mean, the money that we would save would probably pay for all the incentives. And you're right. We'd have people probably shaking hands of our neighbors. We'd start to develop some trust, and imagine, where half of the country could become heroes by simply helping save another person's life, by simply sharing some information that might be powerful. We wouldn't need the headliners, but it's got to start somewhere. And I'm a big advocate for whatever we can do to get the information out. I mean, I sit on 3 committees. I spend a lot of hours every week as a volunteer, and I do it because I want to have an ear to the ground to know what are the best practices, who are the change agents, who do we talk to that are the leaders who really are the influencers, and how do we get to them? And I don't have those kind of contacts like you do. I'm not famous like you are, Fred.
Yeah. All this fame. But okay, so that's going to be it, Scott, for this week. I think it was a great conversation, considering.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, this is what we do. Me and Scott get on, we talk, we counter each other, we ask questions of each other. We both have different levels that we have different beliefs, we have different strategies, but overall they're all positives because we're just throwing things out there that we think could change the world and make you safer, make the addicts safer, get them healthy again, and just make your life as best as it possibly can be. You can't control every aspect. You can't control what's going to end it, begin it, where it's going to start, but you could lead the path, take the right path rather than all these wrong paths. And there's ways to get off the wrong path. So that's what we're here for. Scott's.
Yeah. And imagine, who doesn't want to have a happy, joyous, and free life, a place to live, a roof over their head, a steady flow of income, and be able to make decisions each day that allows them to better their life rather than have to anesthetize themselves because things aren't going the way they want to. I mean, the whole, and maybe I'm too Pollyanna, but I believe there's always hope and help. And,
well, you're not Pollyanna. Listen, you lived the life. You understand what they're going through. So that gives you the compassion. Without you going through what you did, you may not have the compassion you have today or the patience to deal with this long haul. I mean, you're in your 60s now and you're still fighting, a battle to help others, which is, noble of you. And that's what you should be doing as a human being. And that's what we're here to say is let's stop stigmatizing people. Let's move forward. Be more positive, remove some of that negativity. And I'm a negative person. I'm a very pessimistic person by nature and a very cautious person by nature. But you
have gotten much better. I mean, you think about love now, and you think about other people. Just listening to you talk in this short period of time I've known you, we've turned you into a fluff muffin.
Yeah. Well, speaking of love, I got a new puppy. Did you hear about my new puppy?
No, I thought you were going to say girlfriend. I'm glad you said puppy. You're not ready yet.
My daughter bought herself her first dog, a French bulldog, and I got to babysit my grandson today, Bruno Von Hughes, and he's 5 weeks old. He's darling. He's beautiful and very expensive. These dogs are not cheap. but it's her money, her choice. I voted against it, but I love the dog to death, and let her pay for it. She wants to have a dog. Now she knows.
And that's what they say. One of the great things about being a grandparent, the kids bring over the kids and they take them when they leave.
Yeah, that's good too. But
I'm
okay,
looking
so
forward to that one day.
so everybody, thanks for joining us. And remember, we're here every Wednesday, usually at 7 p.m. Eastern and 4 p.m. Western.
Who's coming in next week? Don't you have a VIP guest next week?
We have, I believe, Deborah Driggs is coming on next week. And Deborah Driggs is a very interesting woman who happened to be a centerfold in Playboy magazine and is a Playboy bunny. She tells you, once you're a playmate, you're always a playmate. It's
Can't
like
get rid of that.
You can't get rid of it. And you don't, it's a much prouder thing than, it's more than just nudity. There comes some power with that title. And
I mean, think about it. There was only one a month for years, and that's a very exclusive club. It's kind of like astronauts. There aren't many of them, and once you are one, you are one. So I'm looking forward to talking with the guys.
And she went through some struggles in her life, and she's going to join us and talk about those.
Great.
And she's a very positive woman, very beautiful woman, beautiful person, beautiful human, and I'm glad she's my friend, because I get to tell everybody that I know a Playboy playmate.
Yeah.
So that goes a long way with me.
And all two of your friends keep hearing it over and over again. They've blocked your number now.
Well, I go, what did you do last night? I spent mine with a Playboy playmate.
Yeah.
That's
virtually on Zoom, of course.
Well, I don't add all the details. That's where I end it. I just end it where I give the information that's needed, Scott.
Got it.
I'm still a comedian by nature, so I have to play to that.
Informing up to a point. No, I get it. Everyone should have their boundaries.
Yep, that's it. So that's going to be it for Ending the Stigma. Our hour is just about up. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you, Scott, for joining me. Thanks for the conversation. I love talking to you every week, and we'll just continue doing this until somebody fires us.
And since nobody pays us, how can they fire us?
I don't know. I guess they could. I don't know. Maybe we get fired. Listen, I found other ways to get fired for no reason. So, but okay, everybody, we'll talk to you next week. See you later,
All right,
Scott.
well, Fred, take care. Enjoy the puppy.
Thanks.